Yeah, I saw a window washer. Feels like it's.
Good morning, everybody. We are going to get started shortly, so please bear with us as we are setting everything up on our end.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Jen DeBrule here in Richmond. We're going to go ahead and get started. Many of you attended our workshops that we held back during the month of November following the approval of the capital program prioritization policy by the Commonwealth Transportation Board. At that point, things were moving kind of fast and furious on our end as we were working to develop the application and the technical guidance to support the rollout of the program. By December 3rd. So we're thankful that we made it to that point. We have all of the information now out and available on our webpage, and we thought that it was really timely to get everybody back together and give you a rundown with a little bit more detail than we were able to provide you a little over a month ago when we first had rolled out the program. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go back, and some of what you'll hear will be a refresher, and it'll be a repeat of what you may have heard on the webinar that we did this summer and in the workshops that we held back in November. But there's a significant amount of the content that is going to be new as we walk you through what the application itself looks like and how we are utilizing fillable PDF forms this year to adapt the program to this new methodology in a really short turnaround for our IT staff. So ultimately this year it's a little clunky with having to use these offline forms, but ultimately our goal will be to get all of those elements of the application into Olga and to make it a little bit more seamless like it used to be. So with that, I'm going to just wrap up that intro and point you to the taskbar on the GoToMeeting that you should have. What we're going to do is if you do have questions, you can enter them into the chat pod in GoToMeeting, or you can indicate you're raising your hand. There's a place on there where you can click to raise your hand. We will stop at several points during the presentation and open up the mics to ask for questions, but we're going to go ahead and keep the mics closed so we can keep out background noise for the time being. So we really do intend for this to be an interactive session today, for you to have an opportunity to ask questions. You can also always follow up with your DRPT program manager. They're available to help you with any questions or assistance that you may need through the application process. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Sonnenklar. He's one of our statewide transit planners here, and he has done a tremendous amount of work putting together all of the technical guidance and the structure behind making this capital program prioritization work. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he's going to walk you through the rest of the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Jen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Sonnenklar, and we are here with a few other staff members. We can do some quick introductions, just so you know who's here. To my left, I have Patrice Strachan, and here, I'm going to pan you over here. We have a new staff member named Emily Del Ross, and, of course, Neil Sherman. And throughout the presentation today, if you have any questions that come up, you can direct them towards me or towards any of the staff in this room. For my presentation, however, I am going to turn the camera off just because it is easier to control the presentation that way, and we will proceed like that. In one moment. Okay. Great. All right. So today we will be reviewing the Transit Capital Program Prioritization, which we have marketed as MERIT, the Making Efficient Responsible Investments in Transit program. Throughout this presentation, first of all, I'm going to go over the program in general terms, as you all have heard throughout our many grantee workshops and presentations that we've done, review the types of programs, the prioritization method that we're going to step through, and then get into some of the application guidance that will hopefully shed some light on how all applicants can interact with our OLGA application or grants application system. So before I get started, I did want to quickly take a moment to review some of the resources that are available to you all. And those include multiple resources that are currently on the OLGA website. Sorry, can you just hit exit on there or escape? I don't know how to. Yeah, I need to get out of the presentation. Not on that part, no, on the presentation here. Let me see if I can do it here. Pardon the technical difficulties. And show. Okay, so on the OLGA website, a lot of the information that we will be reviewing today is available there. Yeah, sure. If you could open up the OLGA website and go to the news and announcements. So, yes, news and information. So on the OLGA interface, in the news and information landing page, there are a number of resources available, including the DRPT grant application guidance for all open grants through our program, as well as a quick guide to the capital assistance application and the technical documentation outlining the methodology behind the prioritization process. So if you have any detailed questions, you can refer to any of those three resources. In addition, and I'm going to take control here, the staff resources are always available to ask questions throughout this process. And starting next week, there will be a dedicated MERIT website that is currently getting approved and under construction, but it will be good to go next week. So just to get started here, the prioritization process this year is essentially taking all of the capital assistance applications and organizing them into 3 different categories that will be ranked, scored, and prioritized separately. Those include state of good repair, minor enhancements, and major expansions. Those projects are going to be scored according to the methodology that is outlined in this presentation and in the technical documentation that I just directed you all towards. They will be ranked, and then funding will be allocated to those that meet or exceed a scoring threshold that will be set in each category that will be dependent on the number of projects, how those projects score, and the final funding that we have for each category. Now, that threshold will be dynamic each year. So 1 year, a project that scores a certain number of points may get funded, and in a future year, it may not, depending on the other projects that are also included. Okay. All right. So looking at the types of capital projects, we have state of good repair, which are projects or programs to replace or rehabilitate an existing asset. There are minor enhancement projects, which are projects or programs to add capacity, new technology, or a customer facility meeting the following criteria: that those projects cost less than $2 million, and if they are for expansion vehicles, that there are no more than 5 vehicles in that application, or the vehicles account for less than 5% of the fleet size of the system. For major expansions, those are projects or programs to add, expand, or improve service that include new capacity, technology, and facilities that exceed $2 million, and for expansion of vehicles or fleet vehicles, those projects will need to include an increase of greater than 5 vehicles or 5% of the fleet size, whichever is greater. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why this is moving around. Okay, so some examples of each type of project are laid out on the following 3 slides. This is relatively self-explanatory, but I will step through these just so you all can see. For state of good repair projects, we are looking at vehicle rehabs or replacements. That includes revenue vehicles and support vehicles. It also includes facility replacements, which are administrative, maintenance, or operations, customer facilities, which include bus shelters, bus stops, and signage. Also maintenance equipment and parts, various pieces of technology and communication apparatuses, and other, which would include debt service and the capital cost of contracting. And we'll get to those in a little bit more detail a little later on. For minor enhancement projects, these include similar types of projects, but for new purchases, so they're not replacements. So it includes, like I said, a vehicle fleet expansion. It includes new bus shelters, signage, the purchase of digital bus stop signage, new fare collection equipment, software, hardware systems that are needed to operate your systems, as well as minor real estate acquisitions and funding for capital project development, which would include engineering, design, and construction processes when developing a project. It's going the wrong way. For major expansion, these are the big ticket items. They would include the construction of new fixed guideway routes, that would be light rail or BRT, vehicle fleet expansions that are greater than 5 buses or 5% of the fleet, the construction of new customer facilities, which would include a transit center, transfer centers, park and ride, station improvements, station entrances, and the construction of new operations facilities, which would include anything from administrative to maintenance to bus parking. So again, these projects would be the expensive ones that are more than $2 million. Okay. There are some special categories and some exemptions from this process. Of course, projects that do not receive any state capital assistance are exempt from this prioritization process. So if there is a project that is funded completely with local dollars or with federal dollars, they would not necessarily have to go through this process. For debt service payments, those projects will be scored based on the underlying assets that the debt service payments are going towards. For track lease payments and for capital costs of contracting, which are both quite different in character from other kinds of investments that our agencies do statewide, they should be submitted as state of good repair projects, but they will be prioritized separately because the scoring and the way that we're going to look at those projects is going to be a little bit different. Okay. Before moving on to scoring methodology, I realized I didn't mention this, but I believe Jen did, that if you all have comments or questions throughout, you can feel free to either use the hand raising function of GoToWebinar or just type in questions in the chat section. As she said, I will be stopping at various points throughout to just open it up for questions and turning on the audio of people in the audience. And so I will do that for the first time right now to see if anybody has any questions. All right, is anybody connected here?
They're all muted.
They're all muted still. So full audio control and unmute themselves. All right. I'm not sure if that's working. Can anybody hear me? Okay. So I'm going to put everything back on mute. I guess we won't open it up for audio questions because I don't know if anybody's connected and I'm not sure if it is working. So we will put that back on. Okay. Great. So getting into the scoring methodology, we went over this in our grantee workshops in November, but I would like to go over it briefly again today so everybody is on the same page with how we will be processing and analyzing the projects that come in. For state of good repair projects, we will be scoring them up to 100 points based on two separate scores. The first is called an asset condition score, and that is based on age for non-vehicle assets and age in miles for vehicle assets. And I'll get into some of the dynamics of some of the specifics behind that score in a moment. The other part of the score will be the service impact score, which is up to 40% of that total 100, and that includes some qualitative impacts within 4 separate categories listed out here as operating efficiency, frequency, travel time and reliability, accessibility and customer experience, and safety and security. And again, I will get more into the details of those on the following slides. Okay, for minor enhancements, those projects will only be scored using the service impact score, which is looking at those 4 areas or criteria areas for a maximum of 40 points. So asset condition score for vehicles, as mentioned, is determined by looking at the average score, the average mileage-based score and age-based score of each vehicle. And there will be 50% mileage and 50% age. The specific scores we'll get to on the next slide. Again, for non-vehicles, just the age score is used. Now, a few notes to keep in mind is that the asset age and mileage are compared to the estimated service life, which is in most cases the FTA standard for minimum service life for each asset type. In some cases where the FTA does not spell that out, we have estimated service life charts that are available in OLGA for how the state views other assets. Each individual vehicle that is being replaced will receive a score, while the non-vehicle assets such as facilities are expected to be rated as one project in their entirety. So when looking at vehicles or non-vehicles, they will be scored based on this chart here, or this table here. What this states is that points will only be received for assets that have reached or exceeded 95% of their estimated service life for either age or mileage. So if an asset has not reached 95%, it will not receive points for the asset condition score. So for example, if there is a bus that has exceeded its ESL by 10%, according to this chart, it would receive 40 points for its age asset score. And if that same vehicle has exceeded its mileage by 5%, it would receive 35 points for its ESL mileage score. And so those two would be averaged together, and the asset condition score for that specific bus would be 37.5, an average of 40 and 35. Again, for non-vehicular assets, we are only looking at age. So if there is a facility that needs to be replaced that is 20% over its estimated service life, it will just receive 40 points, and that will not be averaged with anything else. For vehicle rehabilitation projects, which include midlife overhauls or repowers, those will be prioritized along with the other vehicle assets that we receive. However, the asset condition score will be calculated in a different way, which is outlined here. First of all, to be eligible for a rehabilitation, the vehicle must meet or exceed 40% of its estimated service life for either age or mileage. In addition, the proposed rehabilitation must extend the estimated service life by at least 4 years. And once that is actually done, it needs to be updated in Trans-Am to reflect that rehabilitation. So if a bus originally had an estimated service life of 12 years and it had an overhaul done, it will need to be updated to reflect that in Trans-Am, and it will need to take 16 years for its estimated service life. So once it is determined that a bus is eligible for a rehabilitation, the way we will score it is relatively simply. If the vehicle meets or exceeds 40% of age, or of ESL for age, it will receive 30 points. If it meets or exceeds 40% of ESL for mileage, it will also receive 30 points, and those will be averaged for a maximum of 30 points. So if a bus is over 40% for age, it can receive 30 points, but if it's not over 40% for mileage, it would receive 0 there, and then the average would be 15. And so this is so, in general, what this will do, it will have buses that are eligible for rehab come in and be scored similar to those buses that are at or around their estimated service life for replacement. And so if your agencies are looking to use this method to extend the life of vehicles, we would like to encourage you all to do that. So are there any questions? And please type them in. See if they show up here. All right, I haven't seen any questions come in, but as I said, as they come up and as we're going through this, please feel free to type them up and send them in. All right, moving on to service impact score, and this score will be calculated for both state of good repair and minor enhancement projects. The service impact score was created in a way to consider the impact that the asset will have on service and to what extent an asset would affect the rider experience. And so to that end, measuring service impact is a qualitative exercise where points are assigned based on the determined level of impact to service quality by project subtype. In addition to a set of default baseline scores that each project subtype will receive, there are also some additional points that are available based on specific characteristics of each project. And again, the 4 criteria that can each receive up to 10 points are listed below here. So the way that the default or baseline scores for service impact work, for each criteria area, a project will receive points based on whether it is determined to have a high, medium, low, or no impact on service and rider experience. So projects, as I mentioned, automatically receive the minimum score for the criteria based on the default values for each impact level. So an example that's spelled out here, a project ranked as high impact under the operating efficiency criterion would automatically receive 8 points for that criteria. The next slide here, slide 17, spells out the default scores for each anticipated project subtype that will come in. So for example, if you look towards the bottom of this chart where it says vehicles and then revenue vehicles, it has been determined that that has a high impact across all 4 criteria areas, which means, and if you look at slide 18, it will receive 8 points for each of those for a total of 32 points for the service impact score. Similarly, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around here. Okay, similarly, if you look at a custom facility, for example, bus stops and shelter improvements, those have been determined to have a low impact under operating efficiency, no impact under frequency, travel time, and reliability, high impact under accessibility and customer experience, and medium impact for safety and security. So following those baseline scores, a bus stop or shelter improvement project would receive 2 plus 8 plus 5 points for a total of 15 points for their service impact score. And that is the baseline service impact score. In addition, to differentiate based on some specific characteristics of a project, these additional considerations will be used to adjust the default score under each criteria. And there's 2 or 3 additional points that are available in each criteria area. So under operating efficiency, if a building, say a facility is being replaced as a state of good repair project, it will get an additional point if it is LEED certified. If buses are being replaced with electric or hybrid buses, they will receive an additional point for using this alternative propulsion technology. And so I'm not going to go through every single one here, but there are a few on here that do ask for performance measures from the agencies. And that is under service frequency, travel time, and reliability. Agencies that are applying for state of good repair or minor enhancements, their projects will receive additional points if their on-time performance is greater than 80%, and if the average or the mean distance between failures is greater than 10,000 miles. So it's a little bit of a reward for systems that are performing well and that have a high level of or a low level of breakdowns. Are there any questions on this? All right. Seeing none come through. Okay, then we will move on. Great. Scoring for major expansions is a bit more complicated, and you all may recognize some of these criteria areas from the SmartScale application process. The way that scoring for major expansion projects will work is that within each of these 6 factor areas, we will calculate measures and weigh them differently for different geographic areas throughout the state. So under each of the criteria areas here, and this chart has spelled out the objective to looking at each of those criteria areas. So for example, under congestion mitigation, the point here is we want to measure how a project may reduce delay, improve transportation system reliability, and encourage transit use. Similarly, economic development, we're looking at how a project would support existing economies and enhance opportunity for economic development, and so on. And so the measures that follow on slide 21, oh, I'm sorry, slide 22 has the measures. And I'll go back to that map. Address those objectives that are outlined on slide 20. So the map on slide 21, can you backspace a few times to the map page? So the map on slide 21 outlines the weighting categories for projects that are submitted in different areas. So this follows the same project weighting as the Smart Scale application process. And so, for example, in category A, which would be the Northern Virginia area and the Hampton Roads area, projects will be, or the scores generated by congestion mitigation will count for 45% of the overall score for that project. Then 5% would be economic development, 15% accessibility, et cetera. In categories C and D throughout the state, please note that we will not be calculating land use measures for those. It is just for categories A and B. So in each factor area, we are looking at one or two measures to determine the score. Under congestion mitigation, we're looking at the change in peak period transit system ridership attributed to the project. Under economic development, we're looking at the project consistency with regional and local economic development plans and their ability to support local development activity. Under accessibility, we are looking at the improvement in accessibility to jobs due to the project, and also accessibility to some non-work destinations like workforce development, hospitals, schools. And we're also looking at access by disadvantaged populations within walking distance of the project. In the safety area, we are looking at the contribution to improving safety and security, as well as reducing risk of fatality and injuries. Under environmental quality, we're looking at the reduction of daily vehicle miles traveled, which is used as a proxy for air quality improvements. And under land use, we're looking for transit supportive land use served by the project. I'm not going to step through each one of these steps in detail, but I wanted you all to see this, and we will also publish this presentation online once we're done here. The way that we're going to calculate the benefit score for each of those is that we're going to determine the highest measure value in each of the factor areas, and then normalize the other projects according to that, so they receive kind of a percentage score. Now, the specific method that we'll use for calculating the measures within each category will vary from project type to project type, and those details are outlined in the technical documentation that I referenced at the beginning of this presentation, and we can take a look at it momentarily as well. But for each type of project, whether it be a fixed guideway, new fixed guideway project, or a major system-wide fleet expansion, it has a different methodology spelled out to assume, say, ridership impacts or safety impacts. And you can see all of those methods spelled out quite clearly in that technical documentation. So once we create the normalized scores, the geography-based measure weight will be applied. And those scores will then be added together and then divided by their total cost. So everything is fixed for cost. All right. So that is the end of the scoring part of this presentation. Are there any questions at this point. I'm not positive that this is actually, the chat is actually working. Yeah. Can somebody type in,
If you got a hand raised.
oh, you have a hand raised? Okay. Stephen Hennessy. No.
Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
they're over here. Okay. All right. We have a bunch of questions, so we'll try to look at these. Uh-oh.
I can hear you. Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
So will you be sending a copy of the presentation after the webinar? Yes, we will be posting both the presentation and the recording of the webinar on our new webpage, hopefully by the end of this week. If not, it will be next week.
Great. Next question from LJ was if the $2 million limit or the difference between minor and major is determined by state share of or overall project cost.
Good question. Yeah. I think it's overall project cost. We didn't specify in the CTV policy anything overall project cost. And then the state, the percentage is how we would establish the state share. I'm confused how to score shelters and amenities for replacement. If you are replacing something that you currently have, it is state of good repair, regardless of how big it is, how much it is. It's state of good repair if you are replacing something that is currently there. For shelters and amenities that are new, something that you don't currently have, those are likely, particularly for shelters, they're likely to be minor enhancements, and we anticipate that they're going to be relatively, they'll fall under that simplified process.
Okay.
How are you going to prioritize and score capital cost of contracting applications? Great question. For capital cost of contracting and for our rail providers that operate on Class 1 railroads and have to pay track lease payments, those are unique and very specialized applications. They will be prioritized separate from the rest of the capital applications.
Okay. On the scoring for congestion mitigation.
2030 forecast. So for scoring congestion mitigation and node choosing 2030 forecast, what if our analysis uses a different horizon year, like 2040? Are we required to do an additional analysis to determine 2030 impacts?
So for that, we will ask that you include whatever analysis has been done, and we may use a scaling factor to scale it down to 2030. So if your projection is looking at a project to be built in 2025 and your ultimate forecast is for 2040, we will give it 5 years of that forecast rather than the full 15.
And so for the major capital, for the major expansion projects, we recognize that this is a really big change. And there's a lot of data and a lot of information that we're asking for you to provide. If you are working on an application and you reach a point where it's something that you don't have or you're not sure how to respond, before you go create additional analysis or additional work, please make sure you're working with your program manager or with our planning staff here, because we can help determine what we really need. So like in this case, we don't need you to go do additional analysis or do additional work, but we can help make that adjustment here. We can likely do that with a lot of the other items as well. So before you go, we don't want anybody to have to go hire a consultant, especially to do their grant application. So if you get to a point where you're stuck and you need some help, you just need to ask, and we can help. We'll help any way we can to try to simplify that application process.
All right. Are there any other questions at this time? If not, we'll move on, and please feel free to keep typing questions in here. We found where they are coming in, so we will be responding in a more timely manner. Okay. Great. So this portion of the webinar is going to concentrate on the actual application, the process that applicants will need to go through. So the application process has changed from prior years. However, it does follow the same general steps. There's just some additional pieces that you all will need to pay attention to. So the capital assistance application is currently available online through Olga, and the link is here, but you all can just do a Google search for Olga, Virginia, and you will find that as well. And there are additional resources that have been created and posted that will help navigate this process. So there's going to be this presentation, which will be posted online. But in addition to that, there is a document called the Capital Assistance Application Quick Guide, which gives a general rundown of project types and a quick step-by-step instruction manual for what you need to do to make sure that your applications are complete. Again, as Jen said, DRPT programs and planning staff will be available throughout the entire process to answer questions and provide some guidance. And it is actually pretty important that you reach out to them early in the process, because they will be able to answer questions about which category your projects fit most into. And so if we can clear some of those questions up before the application starts, it will help you all move through it a little bit more quickly. So the FY 2020 application consists of 2 components, whereas in the past it consisted of 1. This year it consists of the fields and the questions within the Olga interface for each project type, and it consists of a fillable PDF data sheet with additional questions for each project type. And that data sheet is downloadable within the Olga application for each project type. So in addition, each component requires the applicant to submit supporting documentation that will be analyzed throughout the scoring process. So please pay attention to areas where it asks for that additional documentation. So